Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program tonight, it's another one of our All Things Venezuela edition and another of our All Things Latin America. So, who bears to give us an update on coronavirus and talk about issues that sometimes even the best of anti-imperialist independent media overlooks than the wonderful editors of Orinoco Tribune? Let me remind our audience: Orinoco Tribune is a Venezuela-based independent news outlet providing both a Chavista perspective to Latin American affairs and a hugely critical anti-imperialist perspective on international affairs. And our returning champions today are Saheli Chowdhury, coming to us from Kolkata, India. She's part of the editorial team at Orinoco Tribune and has contributed articles herself to the platform. And we will be joined by Jesus Rodriguez, the editor-in-chief and founder of Orinoco Tribune, who is coming to us from Caracas. And just a reminder, folks, to please share widely all of One Plus One's content across social media. Please help us overcome the mostly far-right algorithms and corporate media by sharing our past content and present content. And yeah, and please, please, please donate to One Plus One. Please support independent media and this independent journalist by donating generously if you can. And on to the topic at hand. So, Saheli, first of all, thank you for coming back on One Plus One.
Thank you for having me back on for the, I don't know, millionth time.
Yes. Exactly. And Jesus isn't here yet, so I'm not going to ask. So I'm not going to ask you this question. So let's talk about this. Hold on. Let me get to the question first. Which is okay. Which is, can you talk to us about the latest activities that are going on with Edmundo, González, and Marina Machado? Because recently your outlets revealed, and several others, that they were involved in a massive sabotage of Venezuela's electoral system during the last general election that saw Maduro's Socialist Party winning. And so talk to us about what they've been up to before I get to Eric Prince
and so forth. So, well, there was, I mean, we knew from beforehand that there would be a lot of sabotage involving, or not just sabotage, because sabotage exists all the time in many sort of systems. However, there were all these indications that there would be a massive, there would be a lot of things around the election, especially because there had been threats. So the threats were coming from all sides, not just from the Venezuelan far-right opposition, but also from the US. And that I always make this very clear, that the Venezuelan opposition, especially the far-right opposition, is not just any normal opposition or any parties or a coalition. It is actually the representative of the United States in Venezuela. It is an internal enemy. So it may sound yes, internal enemy. It may sound very harsh, but it is true. It is the internal enemy of Venezuela. And why do I say that? Because it is this opposition parties, mostly Voluntad Popular, which is Juan Guaido's party, then Primero Justicia, which belongs to, which was the party of Enrique Capriles, and well, there are a lot of people. There, the Acción Democrática, another very old political party of Venezuela. It used to be democratic socialist or something, but it is now extremely far right, which has happened to many democratic socialist parties around the world. And there was Un Nuevo Tiempo. There are other smaller parties. Vente Venezuela, which is a political party which is the party led by Maria Corina Machado, whose name you must have heard. Her name is everywhere there as the opposition leader of Venezuela, but she is one of the opposition politicians, one of the most virulent, most warmongering sort of politicians she is. And these people are really, I would say they're anti-patriotic. They're against their own countries because they have called for, repeatedly, they have called for sanctions and invasion against their own country. That is why I say that they are an internal enemy. Now, they were threatening from beforehand that if they did not win the election, then there must have been fraud. Or they were saying that there will be fraud, there will be fraud. They were saying it, and this message was being amplified in the international media, especially starting from the US media. And when I say US media, I do not mean simply MSNBC or CNN or Fox News or what have you, but also alternative media like Democracy Now, like, this sort of media, which are which present themselves as anti-war or pro-democracy or pro-something, but then they go on attacking the very countries, very governments, people who are anti-imperialists or who are really pro-democracy, etc. So that's claim to espouse one ideology, but in action they do something else. And they were amplifying this message that there will be fraud in the election, presidential election in Venezuela. The election was on 28th July 2024, so last year, in the middle of last year. Okay, so there were 9 candidates in the election, mind you, although you may have heard the names of only 2. Okay, so there was one candidate from the left, really from only one from the left, it was Nicolas Maduro. But from the right, there were 8 candidates. So, yes, and the far right, who the name of whom was heard the most was Edmundo González. Now, the thing is this, nobody knew Edmundo González, although people should know. I will come to why, for bad reasons. But he was the candidate, and it was known that the person who really wanted to be candidate was Maria Corina, but she was disqualified for 15 years. Like, she remains disqualified for holding public office in Venezuela because she had asked for an invasion of the country in 2014 at the Organization of American States. Now, in 2014, Venezuela was still member of the Organization of American States. It withdrew in 2019. Now, in 2014, so Venezuela had an ambassador to the OAS. He was Samuel Moncada, who now represents Venezuela as the permanent representative in the United Nations. So at the time, Maria Corina Machado presented herself there as the alternate ambassador of Panama. Now, that's crazy. Of course, she is Venezuelan, and a Venezuelan cannot hold a public position of another country, even if that position is circumstantial. This is the language in the Constitution. So she, the representative, the ambassador of Panama before the OAS, he retreated. For that day, he left his seat to Maria Corina Machado to represent Venezuela. Well, and there she asked for an invasion by the OAS, that the OAS should send a peacekeeping mission or something to Venezuela because Maduro was killing people, something like that. In 2014, remember, there was another uprising, a coup attempt, the first Guarimba in Venezuela. So and it continued for months. It was going on for months. It was very violent. It killed people. It killed mostly Chavistas. It killed police officials, etc. Although outside it was presented as it was the Maduro regime killing people, but it wasn't so. Now, it was because of this reason, what she did in 2014, that she lost. She was at the time, Maria Corina at the time was a member of the National Assembly, which is the parliament. She lost her seat because of that, because of, traición a la patria, that is betrayal of one's nation, as treason. And she was also disqualified afterwards by the Comptroller General of the Republic from participating in any sort of election for public positions for 15 years afterwards. So in 2022, there were already, when there was this in October 2023, sorry, not 2022, in October 2023, as a fruit of the dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the far-right opposition, which was taking place in Mexico, there was an agreement that Maria Corina and some other persons who were disqualified for this sort of reasons, as well as for corruption from holding public office, they could submit an appeal to the Supreme Court of Venezuela to rescind or to allow them to participate in the election of 2024. So they did initially Maria Corina was saying that she does not recognize any authority of Venezuela, like not even the Supreme Court. So when they say they do not recognize any authority, they mean they do not recognize any state authority, not just the government or the National Assembly, no, not even the judiciary. So initially she said that, and there were other opposition people who said the same thing, that they would do not recognize, that they will do what Maria Corina does, etc. But it happened that at the last hour, like just when it was even extended, that the time period for the submission of this appeal was even extended, and on the last extended date she did submit an appeal. There were others who missed out on it because of her. So because they thought that, oh, we'll do what Maria Corina does, and she betrayed her own people and submitted the appeal. But of course the Supreme Court upheld its previous decision of not allowing her, of keeping her disqualified. Some people, like 5 or 6 other persons, were their disqualifications were removed or suspended, but hers was not. So in that situation, there was all this. There are a lot of problems within the coalition, which they call the Unitary Platform for Democracy, and then so they fill their mouths saying democracy, democracy all the time. But anyway, so they selected finally this person, Edmundo González Urrutia, who is an elderly man, and who is not in very good health, etc. And there were even speculations that Maria Corina just selected him, because he would not live for long, etc. These are speculations. I'm not saying that these are true. So it so happened that he became the candidate. Then he was being presented as the face of the opposition, and Maria Corina was, accompanying him in all electoral campaigns, and claiming that they were gathering a lot of public, but it wasn't true. Like, they do not ever send huge photos or drones or something with it, because they cannot show huge rallies, because they do not have huge rallies. All their shots are very close up. All they show are the stage where the leaders are. They do not really show the people a lot, because there are not much people. However, the opposition does have votes. I'm not saying that it doesn't. Like it can gather some 40% of the votes in the country. So I mean, not all of them would vote because they like her or like her people or like the opposition. There are some who are from old families or from people, conservatives, who would like to see Chavez more defeated and the return of the Fourth Republic. This sort of people also exist, and you have conservatives everywhere, even among among middle class and sometimes among working class also. So I'm not saying the right wing does not have votes; it does. So there were 8 candidates from the right and 1 candidate from the left. That is how they went to the election. But before the election, if you lived outside Venezuela, or if you do not read media from Venezuela, I mean, their media from Venezuela is it's not very disseminated outside Venezuela. So if you do not read media from Venezuela, you would not know that there were 9 candidates, that there were 8 candidates from the right wing, that there were so many political parties or coalitions.
But also important to add that most media in Venezuela is often quite hostile towards Venezuela, because it is corporate media and it is owned by by very small capitalist elitist families, right?
No, not all, but there are some. Yeah, Globovisión, El Nacional, this sort of media are really, yes, old media that are in the hands of the oligarchy. But there is also like Venezuelan state media, Venezolana de Televisión. It is sanctioned by the US. Then yes, the Venezuelan state media is sanctioned. Then the Agencia Venezolana de Noticias is sanctioned. Then you have like all the radios, the Radio Miraflores, and there are many other community radios. They are not sanctioned, but they have their reach is either local or national, and also the language barrier exists. So that is it. I mean, there is in English language, I think there is only Venezuelanalysis and us. So I mean, there is only Venezuelanalysis and Orinoco Tribune that's published in English, mostly in English. So because that was the vision.
And is Telesur still quite big in Venezuela? I know it's
Telesur. Yes, yes, Telesur is big. Telesur's headquarters is in Caracas. So Telesur is, of course, big. It is also, but it is a multi-state media, you know that. So it is big, of course, but Telesur English is not quite read in Venezuela, but it does, yes. Telesur English is something that also publishes news on Venezuela in English, though it also publishes news from other countries also. So that's it. So I think, but,
The
you know,
Telesur, and but I think this is also important to add. But Telesur is state funded by whichever government wants to fund it, and it does have a left wing point of view. I think it's safe to
yes,
say
yes,
it
it
does have
is.
a very left wing anti-imperialist point of view. But at the moment, it's faced many. Oh, so we have Jesus. Is Saheli still with us? Because I've seen he's replaced.
I think it was because of Jesus joining. I don't know.
Okay,
Uh,
one
but
moment,
he should
folks. What
be.
actually, what one moment, folks. Let us. Jesus, are you there right now?
No, no, he isn't. But he might. I mean, he
Okay,
should be, but okay, anyway, no, no, Telesur is, of course, yes, Telesur was created, by Chavez and Fidel Castro. So, of course, it is a left wing outlet. But the thing is that it is a multi state funded and multi state. Its main headquarters is in Caracas, its second headquarters is in Havana. And then it has a presence in a lot of countries in Argentina. Uruguay. Argentina stopped funding with Milei, it stopped funding Telesur, but it exists. The office still is there. Then there it is also funded by, it used to be funded by Chile, but no longer. It is funded by Nicaragua. It is funded by the different states. Hi, Jesus. Anyway, so what I was saying that if you in the run up to the elections, if you are outside Venezuela and if you're reading English language media, or if you're reading Telemundo, etc., El Pais, these sort of things, then you would of course know, you will of course see Maria Corina as the face of the opposition.
but
It's there.
but what annoys me though about but what annoys me about El Pais, and actually this is a perfect segue actually for okay, well, but anyways, long story short, Marina Machado and and Eduardo, whatever his name is, are still stirring up a lot of shit in Venezuela, right?
Well, no, they're starting up the shit from outside, or at least Edmundo is in Spain, I think. But yeah, we'll talk about why there are so many of the Venezuelan far right opposition in Spain. But the thing is that yeah, they are still trying to do a lot of harm, and they are doing a lot of harm from outside, from trying to harm their own country.
And they were involved in and they were involved in an attempt to sabotage the election. They were involved in some kind of
Hacking.
yeah, actually, and briefly explain what that was.
So I suppose Jesus will explain a part of it, but okay, I'll start with it. That well, this what the in Venezuela, the National Electoral Council. And well, it has its, I will say that it has its issues, and Jesus will also say that because sometimes it does not inform properly, etc. But the thing is this, that, well, it does have, I mean, everybody who did participate in that sort of thing will say that it does do a lot of audits and stuff with, multiple, like, 16, 17 things before as well as after, they check the machines, and with the presence, in the presence of international observers, so some of our friends did show you can take videos, you can take photos when this sort of thing's happening, so it's not like these are all done in closed doors or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean
So the
Arnold.
thing that happened,
I mean Arnold August.
Arnold August, yeah.
What was an election observer? Dr. Mara Osman, fantastic journalist from Press TV. She was actually an election observer. Bianca Mugeni was also an election observer. She was probably a huge Canadian delegate, and from what they've said to on Twitter, what they've said to other people who interviewed them, and from what I've from private conversations I've had with with some of these people, including Allison Bodine of Fire this time, was
Mhm.
that there was simply no way that that the governments could have cheated, or that anyone could have cheated. But there was a brief power outage, I remember, that did happen during the election, which caused a lot of, and then there was some kind of ruckus that was going on between the opposition and Maduro supporters. Was that what Machado and Eduardo were involved in, or what? Or
Okay, so there were a lot of things going on parallelly, because this hacking attempt as well as other violence were all going on at the same time.
okay,
so they had they had threatened that there will be no 29 July if they do not win. So the thing is that there was, as like you said, like you mentioned, all these persons, they were correct about one thing, that it is not possible for anyone to, like, once the system is in motion, it's not possible for anyone to steal the election. Okay, so but what they did try to do is, and what they were successful in doing is, you know, making dysfunctional for some hours the transmission system. So like after you deposit the vote, like there is it is electronic. So voting is electronic. So once you have deposited your vote, like once you have voted, cast your vote, it will be transmitted to the accounting system, right? Nobody does it. I mean, it's automatic. So they had been able to hack, or not hack, but there were attempts at hacking, and what it did was it sort of derailed the transmission system. So and this delayed the counting. So like after the election finishes, I mean after the voting centers close, the counting will begin. It's supposed to begin, and it should be like, it should have begun at around, I don't know, 8-9 p.m., but it was after midnight that it began. And just because of this, that they got this crucial 3 hours, 3.5 hours of time. At the time, the Maria Corina Machado, Edmundo González, I believe he is like a ragdoll. But anyway, so what they tried to do was, during these 3 hours, they were publishing their own, what they call, the voting records. So they claimed that they were publishing the voting records during these 3 hours, and that it was the real voting records, and it was showing Edmundo González winning by 76% or something. So like with winning 76% of the vote, which is also very weird. I mean, who got it? But anyway, so it was during this time they did. These were the fake voting accounts. Like they had faked voting accounts, and it was not even many, like 3,000 or something. So they published this, but this was inflated, and that they're saying that they even created a parallel electoral authority. Like at their I mean, apart from the National Electoral Council, which is the real electoral authority, they created a parallel authority claiming that this was the real. They have done this. They have created a parallel government. They have a parallel attorney general. They have everything. So this was also part of it. And they claimed that they were publishing the real results, and that Edmundo was winning by 76%, and that Chavez, Maduro supporters were going to steal the election. They were trying. At the same time, what they were doing is that they tried to create violence in the street, very similar to 2017, 2019, 2014. I was talking about 2014 a bit earlier. So they tried to create that sort of violence in the streets. So the violence that they could commit was that they could do by setting fire to the voting centers, which are mostly schools. Okay, so in general, it is schools where voting centers are, and so they were setting fire to voting centers. They were setting fire to health centers, and even people's there were radio. There were attacks on community radios, which was I also mentioning. So there were attacks on radio stations, and they tried to beat up. I mean, they did beat up, set fire to people, set people on fire. In total, they killed 27 people. I mean, on 28th as well as on 29th July. No, I mean 28th midnight, 29th. By 29th, things were dying down. But they killed two women. I mean, two women community leaders, all sorts of things. So these sort of things they committed, and this was at the same time being inflated, just like in 2014 or 2017. This was being presented by media outside Venezuela, as well as by influencers. Who influencers on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, everywhere else. They were presenting this as the government unleashing violence against pro-democracy supporters, the one who were trying to stop the steal, and this sort of thing was being done. So that was it was the entire narrative. There was a creation of an entire narrative on media as well as with the hacking. And this hack, I mean, Jesus will mention that what sort of hacking it was, but a lot of it was done from outside. Like later, there was a Chilean hacker who confessed that he had participated in hacking. There are, I mean, the IP addresses that were doing this, like the IP addresses that could be recorded later, where like they came from all sorts of places, including North Macedonia. And North Macedonia is a place where the CIA has what is it? One of their what they call
Dark sides.
No, not dark sides. It is open, actually. I mean, it is very public, and it is called an internet security center or something like that. Internet security training center in North Macedonia. A lot of the IP addresses were recorded there. There were addresses in Chile, I mentioned, in Mexico, in the US, Spain, in many countries in Europe. So that was the situation. Like there were people, I mean, not people, there were nodes. Like these were the nodes from where the attacks came. I mean, nobody knows where the people actually are. This is a problem with hacking and any sort of internet things on the internet, that where the persons physically are behind these IPs, you do not know. So it's like what is called a diffuse warfare. So that sort of thing happened in Venezuela. And Jesus will probably mention, I mean, he was in the thick of things, so he can explain to you what how he perceived it, how many attacks were there. Like there were 1 million or something attacks, etc. So he will tell you. And how long it continued. It continued for days. It did not end. These internet hacking things did not end on 29th. It continued all throughout August. So Jesus will tell you these things.
But not enough to thwart. But not enough to thwart the real will of democracy, which was, a majority of people still voted for Maduro in the end.
Yes, so more than 50% of people did vote.
And then I'll just add very briefly because I don't want this particular topic to take up too much time. But I'll just add very briefly that both and I'm actually going to say their names because I keep blanking out a lot. But both Edmundo González and Marina Machado are still going around they're still going around the world, meeting with U.S. business leaders and Western European leaders to destroy democracy in Venezuela. I don't know what other way you say it, but
yes, they are actually going around the world. And I mean, I dislike it very much that they are being able to go around the world. I mean, they should not be able to go around the world, but they are.
Do you want me to add something, Youri?
No, actually, no, because because it's going to take too much time if we focus on on just these two. But Jesus, first of all, we welcome back arbitrary champion Jesus Rodriguez, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of Orinoco Tribune. Welcome back, Jesus. But Jesus, I did want to ask you this question, which is, can you talk to us? Wait, let me get my question out. Which is, can you talk to us about when you got the chance to visit Madrid? Your outlet managed to put on the Venezuela Solidarity event, and can you talk to us about this and what it was like to speak to a Spanish-speaking audience about what's really happening in Venezuela? And I think my big question was did you manage to meet people from the Spanish left who believe all the propaganda about Maduro being this evil dictator, but after listening to your presentation, were they able to re-examine and decolonize their minds and hopefully get on the right track of being a militant Venezuela solidarity member? I'm curious your response to that.
That's complicated. That's a complicated question because you never know. I mean, it's hard to get into the depths of people's heads, and also because I mean, I was invited to this activity, to a couple of activities in Barcelona, but by this coalition, anti-NATO coalition, anti-OTAN coalition in Barcelona, that is very lefty, of course, and the supporters of this event were also related to Samidun, which is a Palestinian organization, and also a Brazilian political party called Causa Operaria. So the audience was mostly, at least in my understanding, in my appreciation, during and after the events, pretty progressive leftists. So I'm not sure if I convince a right winger or a liberal to join Chavista forces, but at least I tried to explain what happened in Venezuela. I gave them my opinions about the elections, about what happened before, during, and after the elections, and it was a nice interaction. I was hoping to have an interaction also in Madrid, because I managed to. Some people put me in contact with some activists, some members of the Izquierda Unida political party in Madrid, but it never, happened. So I did not have the chance to interact with any other political parties in Spain besides this compass from Izquierda Unida, which is a party that I appreciate a lot, because Anguita, the historical leader of Izquierda Unida, was a very good friend of Hugo Chavez, and I always admired his, I don't know how, su constancia, he was very straightforward. He never derailed on supporting Hugo Chavez and Chavismo. So, and he died a few years ago. But as far as I interacted with this compass from Izquierda Unida, they were like somehow students or followers of Anguita. So I hope that eventually one of these days, when I have enough money to go back to Spain, I can, retake that interaction with this compass from Izquierda Unida. So that was basically it. We have this event in Barcelona on a Saturday, and then on a Sunday we had another event, more like a workshop with less people, and we managed to interact with grassroots organizations in Barcelona, in a poor neighborhood in Barcelona. And they are very concerned in Barcelona about the housing problem, and that's something that we discussed there. And I shared with them the experience of housing in Venezuela, but also we discussed about the possibility of doing some sort of workshop or training, online activity with people in Spain to let them know about communication, about how to, how to build communication projects, alternative independent communication projects from the grassroots, which is something that no one talks too much about, but it's extremely important if you're trying to counter the mainstream narrative and propaganda that invade us from all over. So we discuss about those things.
I wanted to ask if you were able to, I guess, convert a Spanish leftist who might believe the propaganda about Maduro, is because the largest, one of the largest newspapers in Spain is El Pais, and reading about El Pais, they tend to be very supportive of the Spanish Workers' Socialist Party. It's sometimes it's called the Spanish Workers' Party. Other people just call it the Spanish Socialist Party. But it tends to be very supportive of that party, which is supposed to be center left, but that party also tends to be very, very pro-NATO, very uncritically supportive of the European Union, even though the European Union is very neoliberal and is very, very pro-imperialist when it comes to not just NATO, but also supportive of trying to oust the Maduro government of Venezuela. And so sometimes we have this we have this awful thing where somebody in Spain will call themselves a leftist, will be very supportive of the Workers' Party, but then be very supportive of NATO and of ongoing Western imperialism in Venezuela. So I was just wondering about if you managed. So I was wondering if you managed to meet somebody who is a loyal reader of El Pais, but then after hearing your presentation goes, oh wow, I did not know that my own Spanish corporate media also lies to me, even though they claim to be center left.
Yes, I mean, first of all, it's important what you say about the Spanish media, El País, and in general, mainstream media in Spain, but not only in Spain, I believe that happened all over Europe and all over the world, actually. But in Europe is the worst because you have people that truly believe that they are leftist. But as you say, they support NATO and they say that Russia, Putin is about to invade them and they need to arm themselves to the teeth and abandon any social the remnants of the social the few social programs that they still have in their countries. So that's what's happening. That's why it is extremely important to have like a counteroffensive communicationally talking, and that's part of the work that we do in Orinoco Tribune. That's a part of the work that you do with your podcast, and it's extremely important. And going to the question itself, I did not find anyone in the activities that I participated that I noticed that belong to that group. But of course, being in Spain, I spent a few months in Spain. I encountered in several occasions. I face people that have this stupid belief that Maduro and Putin and are the worst things that are in the world, and they are the cause of all the problems in humanity. And I was like, come on, man. Don't you see what NATO does? Don't you see what the US is doing, or Maduro are the cause of all the problems in the world? But I mean, there are plenty of people like that, and of course you can try to come have a dialogue with them and try to, make them see things that they usually don't see. But beyond that, I'm not sure if you can convince or not anyone, because I actually believe that most of that people, not all, but most of that people want to think that way, because that's a convenient way, that's a status quo way, and I don't know.
Really.
Go ahead, Sahid.
So, no, I will just, since you mentioned the Socialist Workers' Party of Spain, I will just, since it's talking about Spain, I will just say a very little bit of history of the Socialist Workers' Party of Spain.
Go ahead,
That, yeah, okay. So, when Franco died, the Socialist Workers' Party of Spain actually joined the others. I mean, all the other political parties that were there for that transition. But in that transition, like the PSOE, which is the Socialist Workers' Party of Spain, it renounced Marxism-Leninism. It renounced socialism. So it became a social democrats party. I mean, it was already, I suppose, but its leader, Felipe González. At that time, it's Felipe González, who later became a prime minister of Spain also from the PSOE. So he said he publicly renounced Marxism-Leninism and said that it does not work in Europe, and that in Europe they would have to go the path of social democracy, etc. And they also changed their view on the monarchy and accepted the monarchy, like a continuance of the monarchy in Spain. So that is why it is the king who is the head of state of Spain, and the prime minister is the head of government. He is not the head of state. So this sort of thing happened, and the PSOE also virulently supported Felipe Calderon of Mexico, who was one of the worst murderers, like mass murderer. He is a criminal against humanity. He should be in prison and not in Spain. He is also in Spain. So this is the sort of people that Felipe González and PSOE supported. So you should know that it will. Of course, it will support Guaido. Like, it's not unlikely. I mean, it's not surprising that PSOE will support Guaido, that PSOE will, give asylum to Venezuelan far right people, that it will what is his name? Leopoldo?
I think they gave asylum to Enrique Capriles. The other one, I don't know.
Leopoldo Lopez.
Yes. Thank you. I think they gave political asylum to both of them. Should they choose, if they wanted to get asylum to Spain and not Miami. And I believe current
the US.
and I believe currently
Okay, I mean,
also has given
why the give? I mean, this is also Edmundo González is also got,
yeah, and Marina Machado both have.
So yes, they're all there.
But that's
so. I don't know if Jesus visited Little Venezuela in Madrid. I don't think so.
What is Little Venezuela in Madrid? You mean the neighborhood?
Where all the Venezuelan opposition lives.
I actually live there, yes.
So,
but I didn't have the chance to see. What is the name of that neighborhood? I forgot. But anyway, it's one of those wealthy, so-called wealthy neighborhoods, because wealthy. there's a part of where I sleep that is not so wealthy. but I'm trying to remember the name. But anyway,
does not matter.
I was there,
I
but
call
I
it
didn't
Little
see
Venezuela. I mean, not just it is called Little Venezuela because because of this reason, that a lot of right-wing, you can call it right-wing Venezuela. You can probably call it also white supremacist Venezuela, all sorts of things. But it is the it is called Little Venezuela. I mean, that is a nickname, pseudonym, whatever. It's called a Little Venezuela, and that it is exactly the place where you would, if you go around, you might find Enrique Capriles and what is his name, Enrique Peña Nieto, the two Enriques there. So Enrique Peña Nieto was the former president of Mexico, stole the election in 2012 to become the president of Mexico. So that sort of people are there. You'll find him also. You might find him also in Little Venezuela. So that is it. That is how Spain is, and that is how PSOE. I mean, I told you the history of PSOE, so it's not unlikely that they will support this sort of people. And Leopoldo Lopez's father is a European member of Parliament from Partido Popular, right? So
I believe that he's ending already. He's about to already ended his term, but yes, he was.
Yeah, okay. So his term is ended.
So they had like a special membership status amongst the European Union, even though
he is Leopoldo Lopez's father, Leopoldo Lopez Senior. He is also Spanish. I mean, he also has Spanish citizenship.
Salamanca is the name of the barrio in Madrid.
Okay. Thank you. Anyway, so Leopoldo Lopez's father, Leopoldo Lopez Senior, he also has Spanish citizenship. He is a member of the right-wing. I mean, they're all right-wing, but he's a member of the right-wing Partido Popular. He became a member of the European Parliament from that party, representing Spain in the European Parliament. So his son is in Spain also. He's also called Leopoldo Lopez.
So Leopoldo Lopez's father has dual citizenship of okay.
Yes.
I still find that weird, though. I'm not against dual. I'm not against dual citizenship. But I am against people who selectively use one citizenship to advance imperialism, and that's just it's wrong. It's wrong. And anyway, so he also should be in jail. But it sounds to me, Jesus. So that's very good that you had a very good receptive audience when you were in Spain. But it sounds to me as if we still have a long way to go for the truth, or even just different perspective given a fair hearing in Spain and all of Europe, because it was reported on your website that 3 Venezuelan films were blocked from being screened at a Spanish film documentary festival. Can you talk about this? And then Sahel, if there's anything you want to add, please feel free after Jesus responds.
Yes. We actually published a few days ago a piece about Casa de las Américas, which is a cultural center in Madrid, the one of the most important ones.
Oh, Jesus, just a minute. It's not Casa de las Américas. This is Casa de América.
Casa de América. Yes,
Casa
it's
de
true.
las Américas
It's true.
is in
Casa
Cuba.
is another thing in the US. That's true. I confused the name. Casa de América in Madrid, which is a very important cultural center in Madrid, was decided to at the last minute to stop or cancel a screening with 3 Venezuelan movies that, of course, were proposed by the Venezuelan government. One is a new film about Ali Primera that was, premiered here a few months ago, and another one was The Battle of the Bridges, which is basically a documentary about when the right-wingers try, with the help of the Lima group presidents, to force the entry of so-called humanitarian aid to Venezuela in 2019, and it was a documentary about what happened during those days. And the third one, I don't remember, but
it was Operation Orion.
Operation Orion. I don't know that one. I haven't seen that one, but anyway, those are films that shows the perspective of Chavismo over several issues, and of course the right wingers, the mayor of Madrid, which have an important role in that cultural center. According to Venezuelan authorities, was the one behind the decision of canceling the screenings. So that's something that was announced a few days ago. There are several other incidents that have happened through the years, but thankfully, and because of the news and the uproar that the cancellation caused, many unions and leftist political organizations in Spain invited because the directors of those films were already in Spain, because they were going to participate in the discussions after the screening and things like that. So they decided to invite to present those movies in their organization. So there's like I believe that the response, the positive response to the censorship of the right-wingers in Madrid helped spread the word about those movies beyond the initial scope. You know what I mean? So and now in talking about, there's there are a few. It's true that there are not too many organizations, platforms that spread a message from the left in Spain, but there are, for example, there's a podcast that I follow that is led by this that guy from Podemos. I forgot his name.
Okay.
But they call it La Red. Of course, it is in Spanish, and doesn't reach English-speaking audiences, but it's pretty well seen in Latin America overall, and they do a nice work. I believe that they are not Marxist-Leninist, but Ina, the Russian woman, Ina, I forgot his name, the one that works for RT for several years. They did an amazing job.
Ina Figanova.
Ifina Govonova or something like that, yes, is part of that team, and they do a very good podcast that they transmit almost daily. And if you want to have some information in Spanish with a leftist perspective, that's a good option.
Okay, so the podcast is called La Base. The
La
podcast is
Base,
called La
exactly.
Base. Yeah,
Yes.
it is broadcast by Canal Red of
Mhm.
Pablo Iglesias. There's
Pablo
Pablo
Iglesias.
Iglesias of
Yes.
Podemos, and
Yes.
then what is his name? Juan Carlos Monedero is there a lot of times, and there is Ina Finogenova who worked for
Mhm.
RT and renounced and went to Europe, is now in Spain. And there are others also. I mean, there is another
Yes, there
lady
are
and another
two.
gentleman.
That's true. That's true.
So
They do a
that
nice
is a
job.
big.
They do a nice
Canal
job.
Red, Canal Red has a big presence in Latin America as well as in Spain. It is, I mean,
They
it is
actually
watched by.
announced. They actually announced that they want to open they are about to open a Latin American office, and they are gonna base it in Mexico.
Mexico,
So
yeah.
it's nice. Yes, it's nice.
Interesting. But yeah, because at the moment, yeah, there's a lot of I think the problem right now in Europe is there's a lot of censorship. Whatever sort of I don't ever think there was a golden age, but there certainly was a time where there was a little bit more room for space and debates, and you could advance, a John Pilger documentary or any kind of documentary that was critical of Western imperialism. Whereas now, I think with the censorship of RT, the lack of solidarity Press TV got when Press TV faced a lot of censorship and political harassment, and even with Telesur, and this is where the problem amongst the Western left comes. Instead of showing solidarity to Telesur when Telesur itself faced a lot of censorship, you had a lot of Western leftists that were saying, "Oh, these people are too pro Chavez, too pro Maduro, and they're not giving enough space to critical voices." In other words, lefties attacking other lefties. So at the moment, at the moment, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, but that's good to hear that there were leftists in Spain that were setting up alternative showings to these documentaries. That being
Yes.
said, it's incredible that a documentary about Ali Primera, who was this
Primera.
very popular Venezuelan uh,
Singer.
leftist musician, it's shocking that even a documentary like that would be shut down and not given
Mhm.
the fair hearing. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Ali Primera is very political. So yes, of course, there would be censorship against a movie on his life. And the censorship, it is alleged that it came from Isabel Diaz Ayuso, who is the head of the community of Madrid. So Spain has like provincial, regional governments, not autonomous community governments. So she is the head, and she is from Partido Popular, which is right wing, and she is extremely right wing. So
Yes.
okay,
it is.
yeah, but the article, okay, it's one thing to be part of the People's Party, which as you said is very right wing, but the fact that she is an unapologetic supporter of Franco, okay, like
She is. Yeah, but the thing is this, that PSOE, because PSOE sort of, submitted to this pressure because the film festival, I mean, the festival was by the Spanish government. I mean, it is paid for by the Spanish government. Casa de America is a
A
center that
consortium.
is, yes, it
Mhm.
is a center that is, paid for and maintained by the Spanish government. So the government of Spain, which is led by supposedly by leftists, submitted to pressure from the right winger Isabel Diaz Ayuso and the Partido Popular. That is, of course, telling. That is quite telling.
it's quite telling, and we're not going to get into this now, but one of these days we should actually devote an entire program to this. But also, the ruling Spanish Socialist Party, along with the rest of the center left of Western Europe, and even you can arguably say the Western world, mainly Western Europe, has all been, is a member of Socialist International, and Socialist International, even during the Cold War, where you would say on the domestic front they were very left wing, but on foreign policy they were always very much pro-empire, pro-imperialism, and so forth. Always very pro-NATO, even though NATO was explicitly set up to actually eradicate not only radical social democrats, but of course, communists, throughout Europe and so forth like that. So it's just very interesting, the dynamics that are going on there. That Socialist International is almost no different from the international from the International Democratic Union, which is explicitly right wing, or the Union of Liberals and Christian Democrats states and so forth. So that's an interesting thing in its of itself. Let's change gears though, and talk about this, which is something I'm surprised that hasn't gotten more attention across the major American-based anti-imperialist websites that focus a lot on Latin American affairs. I'm even surprised outlets like Democracy Now! And Al Jazeera and Press TV, and again, others that focus both on Latin American and Middle East, West Asian affairs have completely overlooked this. And that is Erik Prince and his meddling in Venezuelan affairs. Let me just remind our audience who might not know this. So Erik Prince is the founder and CEO of a major private mercenary army, which the U.S. employed to deal with Iraqi rebellions against the Western occupation of Iraq, and was involved in countless massacres of Iraqi protesters, unarmed protesters against the occupation, and has also been implicated in a lot of prisoner of abuse scandals and more. And you can find out more about Blackwater, Erik Prince's companies, if you watch interviews with Jeremy Scahill, who was a former Democracy Now! Producer, Intercept podcaster, Nature correspondent, and now founder of Drop Site News. And people can get his muckraking book on Blackwater, which is Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army. And Blackwater, because of the bad press they received from Scahill, changed their name several once, and they're now currently known as González Holdings. So, Jesus, can you talk to us about some of the can you just talk to us about Erik Prince's involvement in Venezuelan affairs, and how, because, and if this doesn't get people to know that the Venezuelan opposition is not this noble oppositions, but their involvement with Erik Prince, that should generate red flags amongst leftists, especially those who are mostly devoted to Latin American and Middle Eastern affairs. So, Jesus, what's your response to what can you tell us about Erik Prince's involvement with the Venezuelan opposition, and in Saheli, what's your response as well?
Yes, I mean, we in Venezuela face like a very a terrible and very bad organized military mercenary incursion in 2020. We call it Operación Gideon, and it was thwarted very easily by Venezuelan authorities, I believe, because we had intelligence that let us know in advance what was going to happen. Actually, Venezuelan authorities denounced publicly that operation was happening. It was being organized in Colombia. And Colombian authorities at the time, I'm talking about the government of Iván Duque, did not know nothing, and they were actually supporting it, as far as we know, in Venezuela. But people say that, Venezuelan far-right opposition signed a contract with a mercenary named Goudreau, a Canadian, then become U.S. citizen, that have this mercenary firm. But people say that before reaching Goudreau, the opposition, the far-right opposition, the fake interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido, and his clones, they tried to reach Eric Prince before reaching Gadro, but allegedly it was too expensive to do business with Prince, so they decided to the cheaper option. So anyway, that's like the first thing that I know, at least, or that I remember right now about Eric Prince being related to Venezuela. Then he anyway has been an outspoken anti-Chavista person. I mean, his anti-Chavismo has been is not new, but last year, before the election, the right-wingers, in their desperation, I'm talking about, I believe that it happened some September, October last year, they began with this campaign called Ya Casi Venezuela, something that you might translate like, we are almost there, Venezuela, or we're about to do it, or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So they began this fundraising. They never tell anyone what was it about, but everyone knew that it's just to finance a mercenary incursion in Venezuela. And they collected some people talk about a few $millions, but the target was 100 million. That's what actually Eric Prince has been talking about, like the minimum needed to organize a mercenary incursion to kill President Maduro and invade Venezuela, or whatever they think that they will be able to do in Venezuela. So they use that to create some sort of anxiety and psychological warfare against Venezuelans ahead of the inauguration of President Maduro on January 10th. So they did the job because the government was pretty, on alert during the days before the inauguration of President Chavez, and actually they thwarted several and they in jail several mercenaries, foreign mercenaries, just during those months. So the government was very active, the Venezuelan government was very active trying to thwart that operation, and I believe that they did thwarted it. But
Eric Prince's involvement in Venezuelan affairs was that during the Obama administration, continued on the Trump administration, or did that start during the Trump administration?
I believe that at least from what I know, it began during Trump's times, the third term of Donald Trump. He, especially because he brags that he is close to Trump, and he uses that to leverage and to have attention, international attention. So anyway, the fundraising kept going, and then somewhere by mid-February, they stopped informing their followers, for the people that put money in their fundraising, what was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, Eric Prince send a tweet or something like that, telling people that they cannot, or he said in an interview or something like that, that they cannot talk about the details of what they are planning, but that the operation is still going, and they will inform in a timely manner about the next steps. That's the last thing that I know that Eric Prince said, and that was somewhere around mid-February. And there's people, right-wingers in Venezuela, that are like, what the heck is happening, that these guys are not giving us any information, especially because there's some people that put a lot of money there, and they are like tell me like upset by what is happening, and they feel that there's there's some sort of fraud
Yeah.
moving around, the whole initiative, especially because also there were very dark Venezuelan organizers from Florida that become part of the accounting and fundraising management and whatever, and those dark people have not very good reputation, even among right wingers from Florida, and that's a lot. So that's basically what the latest things about that particular case. But there are attempts of doing some sort of mercenary operation against Chavismo or against Maduro is there, and they are pushing for that to happen, and they don't know what they are going to encounter there, because Chavismo is not something that you can destroy with a few mercenaries. So they're gonna crash with reality if they dare to even try to do something like that in Venezuela.
So I'll just
Very scary. And Saheli, before we get to our last topic, if there's anything else you want to add, and why do you feel so many people aren't giving this more attention, the Eric Prince angle? Because, like I said, Jeremy Scahill. Unfortunately, there's lots of things I disagree with Jeremy Scahill now when it comes to Syria and so forth, and the Intercept and their very dodgy, Piero Mediar, who bankrolled the Intercept and so forth, which is a whole other topic for, again, a whole other day. But again, this is quite shocking, Eric. The Eric Prince angle not getting as much attention as it deserves from even outlets which have historically were always against the Iraq War and aren't covering this.
Okay. So, of course, one thing would, of course, be that they do not know. Or I'm sure democracy now would know, but democracy now does not have a very good angle on Venezuela. It does not have a good position. So it might see why it would not want to, I mean, there might be a reason why it would not want to give it much attention. As for others, I mean, if we talk about smaller outlets, the Press TV did do a news on that, starting with that. Press TV did, Ispan TV did, and there were other, I mean, the Iranian media did, because it does news on Venezuela. However, apart from that, I don't think that Western media, a lot of alternative media in the West know about this thing, about Eric Prince. I mean, Eric Prince, he says these sort of things. He went to an interview and asked Trump before Trump was, before Trump was inaugurated. I mean, before his inauguration, he was asking in November, I believe, after he was elected. Eric Prince was asking Trump to raise the bounty on President Maduro's head. There is a bounty on the head of an elected head of state, so that thing should get more attention, but it does not. So Maduro is treated as a criminal, and not many people, I mean, not many, even there is no solidarity, not much solidarity from alternative media, from the left in the West, rest of the world also. A lot of it might be due to not knowing, but a lot of it might be willfully not knowing. And also,
I think
it might be
going on.
It might be so. And he was asking that sort of erase the bounty on his head, but nobody paid attention to that. Okay, so it created, of course, a lot of stir in Venezuela. There were a lot of condemnations against that, but that is what until now, the US government has not raised the bounty, but it has not removed it either. So it still does not recognize the Venezuelan government. It does not, so it continues to fund Eric Prince, or it has relations with Eric Prince. Trump, in the former term, Betsy DeVos, who was the education secretary, she is Prince's sister. So there is a good relation. So that relation is there, and a lot of people do not pay attention to that relation either. And then there are rumors, or maybe more than rumors, that Eric Prince wants to sign or has signed an agreement with the government of Guyana to do some sort of mercenary stuff against Venezuela or to protect Guyana from Venezuelan invasion. We had talked about this earlier about the territorial dispute that Venezuela has with Guyana created by Britain. Okay, so, and in this territorial dispute, there is currently a huge attempt of, smear campaign against Venezuela in Guyana, that Venezuela is an imperialist or proto-imperialist nation. It is trying to invade Guyana and steal its territory, steal its oil, etc. And Eric Prince has offered the Guyanese government, its president Irfan Ali, that there will be like his organization, Blackwater or whatever it is called these days, will protect Guyana from Venezuelan militarism, imperialism, invasion, this sort of ones. So there might be something from there. And the US is also there. I mean, the ExxonMobil is there. Yeah, ExxonMobil, the US government, ExxonMobil contracts mercenaries throughout the world to maintain its operations, So there might be something happening there. There is always Colombia, unfortunately, with a lot of people willing to become mercenaries. So there might be problems from that side also, despite President Petro's best intentions. So, I mean, he might want to stop, but he cannot manage. So these sort of things are there. I mean, there is always this sort of Damocles sword hanging on Venezuelans' head, that sort of invasion, mercenary incursion. The government is very alert, of course, to sabotage, to all sorts of things. Jesus mentioned that it dismantled mercenary operation, and not just in 2020. There was also in 2024, December 2024, just before inauguration of President Maduro in January 2025. There were more than one. Like there were 4 or 5 operations. There were attempts of assassination of the president and other people. There was an attempted takeover of a military fort and armory. There were the sabotage of the electrical system. So but there are also foreigners have been arrested, and European foreigners, Romanian, other East European people have been arrested in Venezuela, apart from Colombians or Paraguayans, etc. So
Yes, from Czech
the
Republic,
someone from Czech Republic, so
Spain
this.
too.
Yes, they're from Spain. They're also from the US. A person, a Puerto Rican, a Mexican, but US citizens, they had been arrested. They had served in the US military. This sort of people have been arrested in Venezuela. So you can understand that who contracts these people. I'm sure there are some mercenary organizations. So it could be Blackwater, it could be others. There are many mercenary organizations around the world. So these things are operating always, and this sort of thing is happening. So it's not a laughing matter. I mean, of course, we might laugh and minimize it and say that, yeah, the government is alert, but of course, the government is alert, the people are alert, but that does not mean that these things are not happening or that they are not attempting to do it again and again and again because they believe that sometime they may succeed.
That's very scary. Thank you for that, and hopefully they will. Hopefully, every time they keep trying to do a coup, it gets thwarted. That's all we can ever hope for. But final question. I wanted was this my final? Actually, yeah. Actually, second to last question. I wanted to ask you. Saheli and Jesus can respond to this. So there's been reports in the news of the U.S. government rounding up Venezuelan illegal immigrants, migrants, whatever you want to call them, and shipping them and others to El-Salvador, where the current far-right government is even being paid by the U.S. to warehouse these immigrants. My friend Bernita L. Haynes mentioned in a post of hers on Threads, she's been on the show many times, and she says that many of these immigrants won't even be sent back to Venezuela, and many family members and others have been trying to get in hold with such and such, but they may very well lose contact for them for forever. And even people who are legal immigrants have actually been swept up in this ridiculous zero tolerance policy by the current Trump administration. This is a huge topic, which again also needs an entire show dedicated. But I did want to focus on the Venezuelan element of this because but I did want to focus on the Venezuelan element of this because I always thought both Republicans and Democrats who love the Venezuelan opposition, and I would have thought that the Venezuelan illegal immigrants, these are the easiest people that the US government can manipulate because they can use these people as weaponized immigrants and use, oh, these are the people fleeing the horrors of the socialist communist system of Maduro and Chavez. But and look at how much Venezuela is a basket case, and there is crime that's out of control. So my question is, why are some of these Venezuelans leaving Venezuela despite the good socialist policies? Is this mainly because of sanctions that the U.S. and notably the EU, Britain, France, Germany, Spain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand have put in Venezuela? And if these and yes, and yeah, so why that? And even if there are half truths to why these people are fleeing Venezuela, why do you think that the Trump administration isn't exploiting these illegal immigrants?
Okay. So Trump and Biden, I mean, not Trump and Biden, I mean, Republicans and Democrats, but especially Trump and Biden, because these were the administrations, I mean, the current and the last one, they actually tried using, I mean, their slogans were different regarding migration. So the Democrats also deported millions of migrants from many countries. I mean, not just Venezuela. They deported millions of migrants from many countries, but they did it. They did these things quietly because the Democratic Party wants to maintain its image as one who welcomes everyone. You know, love and everything they have. You know, they're open to everyone. So, and Trump actually used this image during his electoral campaign. He used this image of the Democratic Party, claiming that Biden had the Democrats in general had this open border policy, which is also a mistruth. But there's open border policy, and through this, all the criminals from South America, from Asia, from Africa are going to the U.S. and committing crimes in the U.S. And that's when he becomes president, he will, cleanse the U.S. of this scourge. So this was his campaign. So both parties deport millions of migrants. I repeated, both parties deport. Obama was called the deporter-in-chief because he deported more migrants than the 4 or 5 administrations before him combined. Okay, so and during the Trump administration, the first Trump administration could not reach Obama's level. But probably he is trying to make up for that this time. And Biden also, the Biden administration also deported millions of migrants. However, the Biden administration also had a sort of they sort of tried to roll the red carpet out for people from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba because of political reasons. They wanted to weaponize these migrants.
Exactly.
Which you exactly mentioned. They wanted to weaponize the issue of migration against Venezuela, trying to trying to manufacture consent for an eventual invasion, overthrowing of government, regime change in Venezuela. So they tried to create, not just Venezuela, in the 3 countries that I mentioned, they enjoy different levels of support and solidarity, from parts of the US population. So the Biden administration tried to create this consent for an eventual overthrowing of the regime change in these countries, political reasons. However, that is one thing. In case of Trump, he has this. All migrants are equal to me.
Actually, so before you answer the Trump thing, so you've already sort of answered the question. So why, if these are illegal immigrants coming from an official enemy country, then why isn't the U.S. Especially under Trump, welcoming them? But it sounds to me as if Biden did do that. So Biden did do that, particularly with Nicaraguan, Cuban,
and Venezuelan.
This is evil.
Yes.
So the Biden administration did try to weaponize those fleeing from from those countries. All countries which were hit by sanctions and which do have violent far-right opposition. So then is the Trump administration is the reason why...
So you don't have... with Trump, but I will mention one thing. Venezuelans, Jesus will do it better. Jesus will say these things better because he knows more. But what I understand is that the people who are, the Venezuelans who are currently in the US, they did not directly go to the US. They have been out of Venezuela for a long time. So, it was the mass migration that started because of the sanctions. There were sanctions from before. Obama started in 2015. Then in 2016 came the oil sanctions, which was huge, and it created a sort of brain drain from Venezuela because it hit the largest public sector in Venezuela, which is the oil sector. Jesus will talk about these things. So there was a brain drain from Venezuela at the time, but many of them went to Europe. And then there was this, 2019, when the Trump administration declared total sanctions. So currently there are 937 measures, unilateral coercive measures. 500 something from them are from the US. So half of them are from the US, the rest are from the EU, from Japan, from Australia, from New Zealand, from some other Latin American countries whose governments are servile to the US, and then also from the international financial organizations like the IMF, etc. So there are 937. It is Venezuela is currently, I think, 6th in the list of the most sanctioned countries in the world, and Russia heads the list. Anyway, so what happens is that many of these people who are from the poorer sections of the society, or maybe lower middle class sections of the society, they started leaving because of the sanctions, mostly in 2019, then in 2020, 2021. Especially during the COVID times when things were especially bad. And these people were initially the Lima group that was created in 2019, which was an arm of the US regime change policy in Latin America. These were the right-wing governments in Latin America. They created an entire campaign, promoting mass migration from Venezuela, saying that there was president, the late president of Chile, Sebastián Piñera, who recorded a message welcoming Venezuelan migrants to Chile, saying that Venezuelans will come to Chile, will get these things that they're not getting in their countries. And they're particularly asking for Venezuelan migrants. There was the government of, at that time, different governments of Peru, because they do not ever have a stable government. Then there was the right-wing president of Argentina, Mauricio Macri, doing the same thing. Iván Duque of Colombia doing the same thing. Guillermo Lasso of Ecuador. So you had the president of Panama, you had the president of different countries. And then there was
encouraging mass migration
from Venezuela.
even though they could have done it by legal means, but even saying, oh, yes, of course, if you guys get here through very dangerous illegal means, we'll welcome you.
That's what
That's
they
exactly
did.
it.
Yes,
that's exactly.
They encourage publicly, not only in speeches, in public opinion pieces, in institutional messages. They invited Venezuelans to migrate to their countries, and they actually allowed Venezuelans to go there even without passports, and they make it public. They let people know that they will be received even without passport, only with the Venezuelan ID, and they even in some cases say that the Venezuelan ID could be expired and they will be accepted. So that was a campaign that was there that no one's talked about, and it's extremely important because that pushed, especially as Sahili said, many Venezuelans, poor Venezuelans, to South America. And when they realized that the Latin American dream that they were offering them was a lie, and they were victims of xenophobia and exploitation and unhuman conditions, they decided to move north. And that's what Sahili was talking about. Go ahead, Sahili.
And of course, just
wow.
It is not just yes.
So they would go to Chile, they would go to Argentina, they would go to
Ecuador, Colombia, yeah.
Ironically, all of them led by right-wing governments at the time. But then when they weren't given the red carpet they thought that they were going to get, then they decided, okay, I'm going to try to get the American dream.
American dream. Yeah, and they were sold the American dream also, and the Venezuelan far-right opposition is involved in that. So there are migrant trafficking networks Everywhere in the world, there are migrant trafficking networks. Yes. So in Latin America, they are called coyotes from the animal, you know. So
Yes,
and
yeah.
these migrant trafficking networks operate everywhere. So they are there and they sell the American dream to these people. So they sell, then they say that, okay, it is the Democrats now. So initially, when they were initially migrating, it was Trump. So they were not going to the US because they knew that Trump was openly anti-migrant. The Democrats are also that, but they show that they are not. So they're saying that they're Trump, so you stay in these South American countries, you cannot go to the US because you will be deported. So initially they stayed in these countries, but they, as Jesus mentioned, they faced xenophobia, and that xenophobia was also promoted encouraged, fomented by these governments, the very same governments that had welcomed Venezuelans initially. They then fomented xenophobia against Venezuelans. So there were all sorts of
But
attacks on
then,
Venezuelan migrants.
but actually, very quickly, because we're actually just on to my last
Yes.
question. But then very quickly. So then, is it safe to say that the huge zero tolerance for even Venezuelan illegal immigrants is that simply Trump delivering to his far base that we just have zero tolerance for all illegal immigrants? We don't care if they're fleeing communist Venezuela. We just don't want anyone entering our country. Build the
Yes.
wall. No immigrants welcome here.
Well, actually, I think this is also part of the this is also part of the hybrid war against Venezuela. So let me come to that point. So this, then after the Biden administration came in, these migrant trafficking networks encouraged these Venezuelan migrants in the South American countries to move north, because they said that Democrats there now, they love migrants, they will welcome you. So they went there illegally again, because trafficking networks, I mean, they just arrange for some papers and they they arrange with the border security and they push people inside the country. So these people were in Venezuela, I mean, in the US. These Venezuelans went to the US through the trafficking networks. They just did not wake up one day and decided. They were sold the American dream. So of course, they could make some money. I know some people, I mean, in the US who say that, well, something that you can do in the US is make money in whatever way, even working in inhuman conditions, you might get money. So these people were working there, they stayed there, and they were very, I mean, working class, poor people. So they did that kind of jobs, that kind of work that Americans do not do. So they were doing this kind of things, getting very little money, but they could send some back to their country because, the US dollar has a lot more value and it is. So and then comes Trump. You said that Trump is delivering to his base, which is true. But even during the electoral campaign, he too was trying to manufacture consent against an eventual invasion of Venezuela. And by saying some important things to note, that he was particularly saying these are alien criminals. He never said that these are illegal migrants or something. He said these are alien criminals. So he was already criminalizing Venezuelan migrants in the very same way that the South American right-wing governments had criminalized Venezuelan migrants, creating an environment of xenophobia that would finally expel them from their countries. Some went back to Venezuela, others moved north. Anyway, so then he also mentioned particularly one organization, a gang called Tren de Aragua, which is a gang in Venezuela. Now, there was a big, Jesus will again mention about it, but there was a big anti-gang operation in 2023 that was particularly directed against these gangs. The biggest of them was Tren de Aragua. It got broken up into many pieces, but it used to be very, very huge. And during this immigration, yes, there were some leaders who moved to the South American countries, and they got protection from the government of Chile and from the government of Colombia, perhaps from also the other governments. But Chile and Colombia are well known. They gave asylum literally to these people, okay, because they were eventually would use them to invade Venezuela. So these gang leaders went to live in these countries, and I'm sure there are also some in the US under protection, like Guaido. Guaido is a gang leader, definitely. I mean, who does that sort of stealing things, killing people? No, if one is not leading a gang. Anyway, so must be. But what Trump was doing is he is also creating, manufacturing consent by claiming that it is the Venezuelan government that controls, Tren de Aragua, Tren del Llano, and other, gangs that are there, and it is the Venezuelan government that is sending these gang members, gang leaders to the US to destabilize the US society and to, to terrorize the US population. So Venezuela is carrying out the war against the US. So that is the sort of, narrative that Trump did, and he is going to stop this thing. So any Venezuelan who is there in the US illegally, who is not Guaido and people like Guaido who are, the US servants, they are criminals. So it's sort of criminalizing poor people. It's criminalizing poverty. It is criminalizing the victims of sanctions, because these people who have migrated to the US or other countries, they are victims of the very same US sanctions. And now they are being victims of another phase in the hybrid war against Venezuela.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Actually, Jesus, you can actually answer then this question. So then, my final question is this, and sorry if it's a bit repetitive, but then what are the reasons Venezuelans are making such harrowing and dangerous journeys to illegally enter the U.S. and achieve the American dream? So is it because Venezuelans now, I know that the government of Venezuela has continued the drug war, which leads to communities being over-policed and law enforcement corruption. Okay, well, before you answer that, okay, so you're already shaking your head. But I've also heard from two people, one who used to visit Venezuela, a family member of mine from Aruba who used to visit Venezuela before Chavez came to power. He said that Venezuela was once relatively safe, but he said that during the Chavez years there was a huge waves of pickpocketing and people just grabbing people's backpacks and purses and stuff like that. I also heard that from a Venezuelan friend of mine who is supportive of the Venezuelan opposition. So you have this. So some people blame, but they never specifically say what exactly Chavez and Maduro's socialist policies did to make people want to leave the country illegally. They just say very vaguely their socialist policies and their mishandling of the economy. But defenders of both presidents, Chavez and Maduro, will say that what's to blame for people making these very dangerous journeys to illegally come to the U.S. and elsewhere is because of the constant sabotage from within Venezuela, which are the sanctions, but also ongoing drug wars, and that's the struggle to eradicate extreme poverty is again the Western sanctions, and that it's next to impossible to eradicate high levels of crime when you do have people who are still so that's impossible to eradicate high levels of crime if the Venezuelan government itself is under sanctions, and this is why you still have people who make these very dangerous journeys to go to the U.S. and
Let me jump there. Let me jump there.
Yeah. So Jesus,
listen.
What's your response to that, followed by Saheli?
Listen, I mean, when I was born in the late 60s, so
Okay.
that gives you an idea of how young I am. In the 80s, Venezuelans in my neighborhood here in the center of Caracas were killed just because gang members or criminals, low-life criminals, wanting to have their shoes. So that happened here in Venezuela. And when I hear those guys that say Venezuela was better in the 80s, in the 90s, and everything was quiet here in Venezuela, I laugh, because that's a lie. That's a lie that is, of course, it's a lie somehow constructed by the limited vision of middle-class people that live in their wealthy neighborhoods and never dare to go to other places and face Venezuelan reality. So that's one thing. So going to the point of the comment that you made about the relative of yours that say that doesn't mean say that everything was great here before Hugo Chavez. That doesn't mean that we face crime spikes during, especially at the beginning, not at the beginning, at the end of Chavez's term. I mean, a few years before Hugo Chavez died. We have also something that you cannot deny, a spike in crime that was not pretty well tackled by the Chavez government and then the Maduro government, not because of lack, in my opinion, because of lack of willing to solve the problem, but because of the human right approach of a socialist government that wants to, that's my opinion, okay? That's, instead of repression, wants to invite those criminal poor people to, I don't know, to change their ways.
Okay. Actually, very sorry to interrupt, because I think that's actually very important. I actually want to continue with that. So, officially, the drug war is still on the books in Venezuela. So the Venezuelan.
Venezuela never
not
had a
drug
drug
war. I mean, we are not a drug country. Actually, Colombia is a drug country, or Ecuador or Peru.
Okay.
They grow, they process, and they convert coca or marijuana or whatever into cocaine and things like that. We don't do that in Venezuela. That doesn't exist in Venezuela. Venezuela is not a drug producing country. The only thing that happens is that we are well geographically positioned, and through Venezuela, some routes, not the most important ones actually, some drug routes that goes to the US and to Europe pass by our country. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But most of the traffic of the drug that is produced in South America goes through the Pacific Ocean, which is the easiest way to reach the US. But anyway,
Interesting.
it's important to highlight that, because that does, I mean, me telling you that we are not a drug producing, I mean, that the drug trafficking is not a big deal in Venezuela doesn't mean that we don't have crime in Venezuela. So crime existed, and that's what I mentioned. You know that it spiked actually during the last years of Hugo Chavez Hugo Chavez last years.
But I think it's interesting that you say that both the Chavez and Maduro government, instead of doing what Brazil often does, or what Mexico often does, which is, okay, we're just going to give much more power
Rid of
to the
them.
police. We're going to give much
Yes.
more power to the military. Go into the favelas, go into the barrios, and
kill them all. Yeah, yes, that's it. That's where the repressive approach. That doesn't mean actually in Venezuela there were a few instances. I recall like 2 or 3 over the last of several years where some excesses happened and were denounced, but that was not part of the policy of the government approach towards crime. What's a different approach that in my opinion was too soft, if you ask me. I'm not saying that I like the Brazilian or the Mexican approach, but sometimes you need to put a stop to, and I believe that's what President Maduro has been doing, especially since 2018 or 2019, getting rid of all these gangs that were formed between 2011 and 2018 and 2019, and they grew too much, and at some point that they were putting some sort of putting at risk the tranquility of the country. So the government tackled them very hard in 2019, 2020, and thankfully the crime went down in Venezuela. Maybe because some criminals emigrated. That's might be part of the reality, but also because the government were chasing them. The government was chasing them. And going back to the other question that you raised about why Venezuelans emigrate, people emigrate from all over the times people emigrate.
Would you say, would you say that the well, actually, I probably should let you answer this, but would you say that currently, if there is a big Venezuelan wave of illegal immigration to the U.S. searching for this bullshit American dream, but hey, people do believe that, and it still is a very powerful propaganda, that if there is a lot of people illegally immigrating, it's because of the same reason why you have a lot of Cuban illegal immigration. How much is still there, I don't know. But if there was a wave of of a lot of Cubans illegally leaving the leaving Cuba to go to America, to go to Miami and so forth. But Cindy Sheehan, many people say that that's because of the Cuban embargo. That's because the U.S., which has always had this monstrous sanctions of mass destruction inflicted on Cuba, the U.S. always finds ways to make it more and more cruel. And when the U.S. ups the ante, that it was only in the very late 1980s and the 90s, especially with the fall of the USSR, that you had many Cubans who felt that, okay, we're being impoverished. Yes, we love our socialism, but we're still impoverished. Ergo, we're going to go illegally move to the U.S. And it's that what you have with Venezuela, basically, that even with so many of the good socialist policies, because of the sanctions that's on Venezuela, which mostly, at the end of the day, always hurts the poor, and that's why you have Venezuelans who go, illegally move to the U.S.
It's a complex issue. Let me tell you something. I mean, as I was telling you, migration has been there always. And in the case of Venezuela, there were a lot of migrants from Venezuela in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And most of them were upper middle class, people with means that traveled to Europe and to the US. And they were a minority of Venezuelan migrants there. Since 2011, 2012, during the last years again of President Chavez, the Venezuelan economy begins to feel the U.S. Aggression in several dimensions. Maybe at that point we cannot talk about sanctions in the strict sense, but we were already targeted. I mean, we actually were targeted by the U.S. since 2001 or 2000, if you ask me, but the U.S. targeting of Venezuela was already being felt during those years. And that crossed with the illness of Hugo Chavez, with the lack of preparation of Maduro that was just all of the sudden becoming the president of the country without asking it. Many things happened during those years, but the important thing is that between 2013 and 2019, the GDP of Venezuela, the gross domestic product of Venezuela, went down by 75%. What that means? That means that if the Venezuelan economy produced $1 million in 2013, 6 years later, we were producing only $250,000.
Wow.
And that's a lot in terms of how the humongous effects that has in society. And you have to add to that after 2015 existing, the sanctions began to be really felt and officially announced by the U.S. government, and that makes things worse. So that's that, with the invitation of Latin American countries, right-wing presidents for Venezuelans to emigrate, together with the policy of the U.S. to accept Venezuelan migrants just by saying that they were political prisoners, which is another part of the story. And that happened. And a lot of those Venezuelan migrants, they cross the border in the U.S. and they don't they don't do it in the height. They actually, when they cross, they surrender to U.S. Customs and Immigration officers, and they immediately request asylum. That's a procedure. You know, that's how it works. I mean, the coyotes take you to the border of Mexico. They make you cross the Rio Grande. And then when they touch U.S. soil, they do it in front of immigration officers. Yes, because that's how it works. They immediately, when they are caught by U.S. immigration officers, they request asylum. And then they request asylum because the argument is that they are escaping Venezuelan authoritarian regime or escaping crime. That's another excuse that they use, and that they fear for their life. And those are the most common things that happen. So I tell you this just to give you an idea of how complex the whole Venezuelan immigration thing has been happening. And now all of a sudden, they decided to get rid of those migrants because of what Saheli was telling you, because they now can use the Tren de Aragua arguments as an excuse to get rid of those migrants, to somehow to fulfill Trump's narrative against migration, the racism that is behind that narrative also, which is something that no one talks too much about, but that's basically a racist approach towards migration, because you don't see planes of Ukrainians or Spanish or Belgians living in the US without legal status being deported to Europe. And those things happen too. But it's a racist thing also. But the narrative is that Venezuelan migrants are criminals, and now Trump wants them to go back to Venezuela, but because Venezuela doesn't comply with whatever the U.S. said, they force Venezuelans. No, they are trying to force the Venezuelan government to Dutch. And that's why they sent migrants to Guantanamo first. And that's why they sent Venezuelan migrants, accusing them of belonging to the Tren de Aragua, which is another big lie, because Tren de Aragua is a petty crime organization. You cannot compare Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua actually doesn't have a head. The organization was the organization was dismantled because of what I told you, these raids that the Maduro government did in 2020 and 2021, I believe, and they don't have a head. I mean, there might be pieces of the Tren de Aragua out there, but that's not an operational organization. But they all of a sudden created this ghost of Tren de Aragua just to fill the narrative that they need to expel Venezuelans, and they can use that also because they put the Tren de Aragua, they announced the Tren de Aragua was going to be, is now a terrorist organization. And they can use that to launch military operations in Venezuela with the excuse of getting rid of Tren de Aragua, something that does not exist. And you cannot compare Tren de Aragua, as I was telling you, to El Cartel de Juarez or all those very, I'm not saying that it's okay that those organizations were put in the list of terrorists also, but I'm telling you that it's evident that those organizations have a head, are organized, and are very merciless. I mean, they are ruthless, that they kill people in terrible ways. That doesn't happen with Tren de Aragua. I mean, when you dig in the internet and look for information, academic information about the Tren de Aragua, you will find that it's overdimensioned.
Yeah.
But it's very useful to achieve those two goals, you know, to get rid of Venezuelan migrants because of the racist Trump approach toward migration, and also to try to use it eventually for a military operation against Venezuela. and also to use it as a propaganda to say that Venezuela is an uncontrolled government, socialist failure that needs to be addressed, and that's why eventually they will have a humanitarian intervention against Venezuela. So sorry for speaking too long, Sahili. Go ahead.
Actually, all of that is
Yeah, it's very important.
very,
Yeah.
very important, and it's completely and in fact, even the articles I've been reading on Orinoco Tribune has actually left out some of those important things. No, and I think it's also important to realize that the far right have also completely moved the goalposts with immigration. So when Trump became the far right rock star that he is, when he called when he called most of the immigrants coming from Mexico a bunch of drug dealing rapists, he got a lot of applause from a lot of Americans, not just from the far right, but even if you want to call them liberals, because a lot of liberals will also say things like, "Oh, if you're an illegal immigrant, yes, you do have to go back to your own country. But if you've been here for more than 7 years, we'll find a pathway to citizenship." The Brexit debates, when Britain voted to leave the European Union, a lot of the, many people were very supportive of UKIP, still supportive of Nigel Farage because he talked mostly about illegal EU migrants or just vaguely EU migrants, which was just a vague dog whistle term for illegal EU citizens coming into the country that the EU forces on us because we're a member of the European Union. But now, if you listen to a lot of Nigel Farage's rhetoric and speeches on immigration, he explicitly talks about even being harsh on legal immigration and that we need to have a net zero policy for immigrants. So we don't want any immigrants. We don't want illegal immigrants, but we also don't want legal immigration, which is why the Reform Party and the Conservative Party campaigns on actually Britain getting out of the European Court of Human Rights. And the Conservative Party, many members of the Republican Party, and others have actually been flirting with the idea that we need to get out, that we need to rip off the agreements we have on refugees and so forth. So what you have right now with the Trump administration is just a zero tolerance policy. So it's no longer about illegal immigration. It still is that, but what you have now is many legal immigrants getting swept up. And America has done this before. America, during the Great Depression, they rounded up not just illegal Mexican immigrants, but even legal Mexican immigrants, and just shipped them off into Mexico. They did that with their war on drugs. They went into impoverished communities which had lots of legal El-Salvador immigrants, and then just shipped them back into El-Salvador, and that gave birth to the modern day MS-13 movement. And now they're doing this with Venezuelans. So it used to be, "Oh, please, Venezuelans, you're the good. Let's see."
Well,
And
I'll
it's
just
terrible.
say,
Go ahead, Sahi. Go ahead.
no.
So yeah.
No, and Jesus actually mentioned something. So that exactly zero tolerance. It's zero tolerance against people who are not considered white.
Exactly.
So that is something. Against people who are not considered white, okay, who may be white or not, but that does not matter, but just not considered white. So, and of course, the Tren de Aragua does not exist as MS-13, which you mentioned. It does not exist as Cartel de Sinaloa. It is not Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. Well, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, which is like a terrible, ruthless organization whose they said an extermination camp was just discovered in Jalisco, basically. So these sort of things actually, or the cartel that is in the Michoacan, Familia Michoacana, these are really big organizations also created by the US for more than 100 years ago just to control Mexico. And Tren de Aragua is not like that. Tren de Aragua, Jesus mentioned, it exists in pieces, and maybe some are in the US, maybe some heads are protected in the US. Who knows? There are definitely some in Colombia protected in Colombia.
But isn't that a but actually, isn't that a tribute to the Venezuelan government that they actually have not managed to have all of these monstrous drug cartels like you do have in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia? There is, as Jesus has mentioned, there's never been narco-terrorism going on in Venezuela. Even the gangs that do exist in Venezuela don't even get to the level of evil monstrosity that the Mexican mafia does. I mean, the Mexican mafia, they're so violent that most of them are in prison and have to do their criminal gangs within the prison. That's how
Yes, I mean
monstrous
these guns are. I mean, they are not kids in the playground. I mean, they are bad guys, but you cannot compare them. It's true to these other criminal organizations that might be in Mexico or Colombia or in any other countries. And one thing that people said, I mean, is that the Tren de Aragua got notoriety when they became part of the human trafficking networks. And they began to do that when Venezuela crossed the border with Colombia, and people went across the border from one side to the other because we have historical centuries of history of relations between those countries, between Venezuela and Colombia. I mean, they began to cross the border with the help of those coyotes. They began is the third most lucrative illegal business out there after drug trafficking, and I don't remember the other one. Weapons maybe.
Drugs
Yes.
and weapons.
Yes, but they are tiny petty contractors and they actually moved to Mexico, and they also participate in coyote networks in Mexico, moving Venezuelans too. But they are seen as petty contractors for the big Mexican cartels that control that business. So they actually not even control the operation of human trafficking from Mexico to the US. They are just constructors in some areas that the Mexican cartels allow them to be. So that's basically some additional information that I want to share with you.
Okay, so I'll just mention some other things. I mean, very small things about these things. That, well, as I was thinking about the 1980s, well, when in 70s and 80s, when Jesus was young. So in 70s and 80s, then Venezuelan governments were very similar to the former Mexican governments, killing their own people. So there were movements for democracy, and they were very harshly repressed. So it was not like, I mean, it depends on which Venezuelan you ask about how violent Venezuela was in the 70s, in the 80s. It wasn't a very peaceful country. People were killed, people were disappeared, no? So it was a sort of plan condor without for official dictatorship, because there was the dictatorship of the two-party system.
The desaparecidos term was coined in Venezuela. A lot of people associated it to Argentina and Uruguay, but the desaparecidos term, they disappeared, is something that was initiated in Venezuela. Go ahead, Sahi.
So yeah, I mean, you have to ask, what is crime? I mean, what do we call crime? What do we call violence? So just people snatching, well, it is also violence, definitely. People snatching someone else's purse is definitely violence. But can it be compared to, forcibly disappearing someone because you do not agree with them politically? It cannot be compared. But it happened in Venezuela. This was mentioned, the term itself, desaparecido, which is actually the disappeared, like forcibly disappeared for political reasons, which was the original meaning. So that was coined in Venezuela. So something was happening, right? So yes, and you have, like, for example, I mean, there are people who were disappeared. Like, there are people in the government now whose parents, whose family members were disappeared, were killed. This sort of thing happened. So it is not like Venezuela was a very peaceful country in the 70s, in the 80s,
and everyone was
90s.
happy.
So it depends on who you ask. It depends on who you exactly ask. So that is one thing that I I always mention when someone says that this country was very peaceful in the 70s or 80s. It wasn't. And well, I mean, you have to compare. I mean, state crime is also crime. It's not just that someone snatching someone's purse or someone putting a bomb somewhere, which is also very bad, is the only crime. There's also crimes. And then, as for the current thing, I mean, they are bad guys. Is drug wars. Drug wars never existed in Venezuela because Venezuela was not a drug producing country ever. So not ever. So there was never any war against drugs. That does not mean that the government does not have programs against drug consumption or something like that. These things exist. They exist in all countries, and they should, because young people should not be like losing their
Besides the
lives.
US in Europe. Maybe in Europe they have some, but in the US they have none. It's weird.
But yeah, in Venezuela, there are actually campaigns. The government has campaigns against drug consumption and people not falling into drugs, especially targeted against young people. I mean, these campaigns are directed towards adolescents and young people. But that does not mean that it is a war on drugs. It is not. I mean, Maduro is not Felipe Calderón. Maduro is not Ernesto Cedillo. Maduro is not Carlos Salinas de Gortari. No? So this
or
have
even
to
Lula
be
and film, because
or Vicente Fox, who I always
Terrible.
forget, but who was also a
Yes.
terrible person. So this Maduro is not that. Maduro is not Ivan Duque. Maduro is not Alvaro Uribe. Okay, so there were never any war against drugs in Venezuela. I mean, the war on drugs created by the Obama administration in 2009. It was exported to Mexico and Colombia as part of Plan Merida. To control these countries. These actually increased the production of drugs and the trafficking of drugs to the US. And of course, this also existed before. CIA did it for more than 100 years using Mexico. The cartels, I mentioned it again, they were created by the CIA to control Mexico and to control the US, people in the US, by submerging them in drugs so that they cannot
the
think.
Iran-Contra scandal, which Gary Webb exposed that involvement as well. So yeah.
So these things, I mean, Venezuela cannot be associated with that. But the US also invented a cartel for Venezuela, which they named Cartel de los Soles, and claimed that Diosdado Cabello or Maduro or Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who is the defense minister.
They are trying to revive it right now, by the way.
So they created, this was created in the first Trump administration, that there is a cartel which involves the top officials of the Venezuelan government. Diosdado Cabello is the head. So Diosdado Cabello is now the interior minister and also the second in command of the PSUV. And he is the one who has very, very close relations with the military. So he is considered, I mean, they just created this cartel. It does not exist, but you might find it.
Without showing any proof, without showing any real evidence. Go ahead.
So you might find it. So you might find it in the OFAC list, of sanctions against persons, targeted sanctions against persons. So Diosdado Cabello is sanctioned because he is the leader of the Cartel de los Soles, which does not exist. So they have created it. And they have also tried to put Venezuela in a list of drug exporting countries like that. But Venezuela isn't. It does not even feature in the UN list anywhere. No, because it was never a drug producing country, not even a drug consuming country. It's nothing. Drug is not a big problem. So there are minor routes, the Caribbean minor routes, not the Pacific one. So that is the sort of thing. So it's not like there is anything there, but it is a creation. And if you do a search in any sort of search engine, the algorithm will show you these things. There is a Tren de Aragua, and it is put in the same list as international terrorist organizations, along with MS-13, along with Cartel de Sinaloa, along with Jalisco Nueva Generación, Familia Michoacana, and many other things. So it is put in the same list precisely because of this reason. Like the Mexican cartels are real, the El-Salvadoran gangs are real, but the Venezuelan ones, one of them does not even exist, never existed, the Cartel de los Soles, and the other, Tren de Aragua, it's broken into small pieces.
Let me jump for a second, Sahri. Now that you mention El Salvador, I just came to my head the indignation that I felt when I saw those so-called Tren de Aragua gangsters being deported, arriving to El-Salvador, and being treated as terrorists.
Yes.
And that indignated not only me, I mean, many Venezuelans, the majority of the Venezuelans, disregarding the political views, were disgusted by those images, because not because we defended Trinidad, but because we know that maybe 99% of those guys are just illegal immigrants, if you want to call them illegal. And they no, I mean, before this deportation to El Salvador, Venezuela have received 4 flights from Venezuelan migrants, totaling like 605 or 609 people that arrived to Venezuela through the Vuelta a la Patria program in February, I'm talking about. Out of those 600 something Venezuelans, only 16 had criminal records. They were received with the most, I don't know how to say it, very extremely well treated by the Venezuelan government first, but they also received detailed screening, criminal background checks before being delivered to their families here in Venezuela. And only 16 of them had criminal records, and none of them were, the government could identify that had any sort of connection with Tren de Aragua criminal organizations or any other criminal organization. So that's why many Venezuelans are disgusted by what they saw, especially because in El Salvador, they were being treated as terrorists. They raped their heads. They put it in the ground. I mean, the conditions of that prison that they were sent in El Salvador are terrible, and it has been denounced all over the world, not only by leftist organizations but also by liberal NGOs and things like that. So the decision of the U.S. government, I believe, is backfiring against the U.S. government itself, of course, but also against the far-right Venezuelan opposition that has been supported the Trump approach towards migration. And now I believe that today they are announcing that we were already put in this list of countries that are denied entry in the U.S. even with visas. So right-wingers in Venezuela, which are the ones that travels to the U.S. the most, as you might think, now are like not knowing what to do with their lives because they are not going to be able to travel to the beloved U.S. because of that. It's a terrible mess that Trump is creating.
It's very bizarre because it's very bizarre because both Edmundo González and Marina Machado support these grotesque, tough on illegal immigrants, tough on crime policies that's being inflicted on very innocent, peaceful Venezuelans. But then so we don't have much time, but I guess the final thing I want to talk about, which we probably can't conclude and have a big discussion on, but then is it so. But I think but I just want to clarify one thing. So is it very important to say that, okay, lots of reasons why people want to immigrate to the U.S. or to any developed country. They believe the fairy tales that it's all milk and honey, red carpets, and that they're going to be super rich and super middle class if they do these perilous journeys and work their way to the top. But then it's very safe to say crime is a very, very complicated subject, but that most of the people who do, at least in Venezuela, who do go to the U.S. illegally, they do it for the same reasons that Cubans will do it, because even though there are lots of good socialist policies, but because of the sanctions, they still are impoverished, so they feel the need that they have to do these perilous, dangerous journeys.
Yes, it's economic migration basically, and doesn't have to do with politics. I mean, actually, if you are feeling that your conditions in the country that you were born are not giving the opportunities for you to survive, and you know that in other countries you might have more, you believe in that in other countries you might have those opportunities, you are going to try to do it like many people does. Actually, it's also important to highlight that Venezuelan migrants, I believe, that are not in the top 5, not even top 10 nationalities of migrants arriving to the US. It's important to highlight that. We are in the headlines. But you have Mexicans, Salvadorians, Guatemalans, even Europeans
Colombians,
Colombians, Ecuadorians. I mean, you have many of them in the top list, but you never hear of that because that's not news. That's not what the mainstream media want you to hear. But I'm not saying with this that the migration issue is not there. We have Venezuela, and in Cuba we have an important immigration problem. But as I told you, it's caused by economic hardship. And most of that economic hardship, I'm not saying that all of it, but I believe that the most important shock of the economic problems and social problems in the case of Cuba is terrible. What is happening in recent years with the problems with electricity, with the tightening of the blockade, and all the things that are causing, I mean, the island is, I mean, that happened to us like 3 or 4 years ago, but I believe that that has been transferred to Cuba in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's terrible because that doesn't show that, as the mainstream media want to tell you, that it is the failure of socialism.
Exactly.
In my opinion, it is.
And then there's the cruel incentive of, oh, you'll be the good. You will be the immigrant that gets the red carpet treatment if you say, basically engage in
Exactly. I mean,
propaganda.
there's an agenda that
I'm
promoted
fleeing
that
Venezuela from an
immigration.
evil communist leader.
Also, I mean, you have incentives to migrate also, especially from our countries, from Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, because you know that you will receive red carpet when arrive. At least you knew. Now it's different, at least in our case. So, and that's a good thing, if you ask me, because I believe that maybe many Venezuelans will want to come back to the country or will stop their plans to go to the US. And that's important because we were drained by that migration crisis between 2015 and 2019 or 20. So I believe that might help the country to revive, as we have been economically reviving since 2001. I believe that Venezuelan GDP has been growing steadily since 2021, and it's not a big growth, but it's constant. And if you see the faces of Venezuelan right now in the state of Venezuela are very different of what you saw 4 or 5 years ago. So you have optimism, you have it's different, and you notice it, especially those of us that live here, you know, and have to endure what happened a few years ago.
So Saheli, final thing I want you to respond to as we close, as we close this conversation, is your response, because I am curious, your response to the whole, oh, once upon a time Venezuela had very low crime, and because Chavez and Maduro like mishandled the economy, now there's pickpockets everywhere and so forth. That being said, like, I don't want to minimize whatever my friends who have experience, like who have experienced that in Venezuela. I'm not minimizing that. That's terrible, but at the same time, that's also like, okay, that's also like me if I was to go to France and I got, hit above the head and somebody stole my iPhone. I'm not going to say that France is a cesspool of crime and so forth. And okay, maybe there is more of that in Venezuela, but at the same time, Venezuela has always had huge gaps between rich and poor, so that is going to be much more common. But at the same time, it's only through socialist policies and social justice policies that the most extreme crimes of robbery, breaking, breaking and entry, that goes down. But at the same time, Venezuela also is a country that has that is placed with so much. And I don't even like the term sanctions. I prefer economic terrorism. So I'm curious how. So I'm curious how do you respond or even explain, the issue of crime if it is even such a big issue in Venezuela.
Okay, so it's actually very interesting. First of all, there is a big problem of explanation, because most people these days actually, maybe it was always, but these days there is a there is a lack of attention span. So people's attention spans have shortened. So when you start explaining with data and stuff like that, people want sound bites. They would want one-line explanations, and this is something that makes journalism very difficult. So, or even talking to people very difficult, because there's okay, Venezuela was once upon a time very peaceful, and then you say no, in the 70s and 80s people were disappeared and killed because political persecution. It was real political persecution, and people were disappeared and killed. It does not happen anymore. So that was violent crime. That does not happen anymore. And then they will say, no. What about the robberies? What about these things? They existed then also. And so said people's shoes, like someone wanted people's shoes and killed them. So that's something like snatching and fleeing is not like killing someone for their shoes. I mean, things can be replaced, life cannot be. So if that has gone down, if violent killing has reduced, then that is a big progress in any country. Secondly, the socialist policy. The biggest socialist policy is actually this humanitarian approach, which also Jesus mentioned. I mean, human rights is not a liberal thing. It's really a socialist thing. Humanitarian approach is that you should attend to the root causes that is causing the crime. And that is why there was this there is actually the policy, not was, of reintegrating people who were forced into crime because of poverty. So if someone can like people need to live, they would live in whatever way they can. So if they're in what is called the gray economy and part of it is criminal, then there is a policy of reintegration of these people into the society, into the mainstream economy, by maybe giving them training, by giving them a better education, or giving them housing. Venezuela has like one of the best housing policies in the world. Okay, so I mean, this thing of housing is a human right. So this sort of the housing is a constitutional right. They get houses because if you are Venezuelan, you will get a housing, like public housing policy. There have been more than 5 million houses delivered to people in order to, so that there are no people living in the streets. That is the policy. So when you are doing these things, you are attending to the root causes of crime, which is poverty. So you are trying to reduce poverty, you will reduce crime. That is exactly the policy also of the current government of Mexico, and that's started with Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. So he said, "Abrazos no balazos," like the hugs not bullets. And he said that, and he was turned into a criminal for saying this, that he is like giving hugs to criminals. That's not true. This was a campaign. This was a campaign of not like destroying his reputation during his when he said that, after he said that this was a huge campaign in media, that he is embracing criminals. But that's not true. You're saying that we'll attend to the root causes that is causing people to go into crime, because most people are not bad. Most people do not want to kill people violently. Most people do not want to commit crime or violent crime. So we will just try to get them into the fold of the society, so that we'll be reducing crime in this way. And this has actually been giving fruit, and even in Mexico, in a country so turned into such a violent one by the US, through the cartels, through invasions, through the CIA operating, etc. So you are right when you say that it's only socialist policies that can make the society better and that can reduce crime. So it's also true in Mexico. It's true in every country. Like, it will be true in every country which has problems and which is trying to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, or the social inequalities, economic inequalities, you will have a decrease of violent crime in all these countries. That does not mean that crime will disappear overnight. That does not mean that there will not be ups and downs. And this economic terrorism, what it does is it actually takes away the power of the government to attend to these root causes. So when you are taking away a government's main source of income, like in case of Venezuela, first was the oil sanctions. Oil was and remains Venezuela's biggest export item. So when it is the only way in which, it was the way in which the government was actually financing these social policies, and you were taking away a government's economic power, then you are actually also taking away these social policies, social welfare policies. And this happened in Venezuela. Public services deteriorated terribly during, I just will say that they still remain very deteriorated, though there have been some recovery. And this happened exactly because the government's economic power is taken away to attend to this. Housing, everything suffered. Education, not just because of the brain drain, but also because of there was no money. The government did not have money to do these things, So sanctions or the economic terrorism, the unilateral coercive measures also does these things. And this is one of the aims of actually the economic terrorism. Make the Cuban economy scream, make the Chilean economy scream. So it's also making the Venezuelan economy scream, because that way you are going to trying to overthrow a target government. They could do it in Chile. They have not yet been able to do it in Cuba or Venezuela, but that does not mean that that can never happen, or that they will not take the invasion route if it happens. So we always have this fear that there would be an invasion. There could be an invasion of any country at any moment. It exists. Maybe not Venezuela, but there is always the possibility. You cannot discard it altogether. Now all options are on the table. As for these blackouts and other sort of things, the shortages, the blackouts in Cuba are not worse than the blackouts in Ecuador, or the blackouts in Puerto Rico, or the blackouts in Peru, or even in Argentina. There have been
In
blackouts in
Panama,
Argentina
there
in
was once
Panama.
a few days ago.
Yeah, 2-3 days ago, actually, there was an explosion at a substation or power station, and it was like the whole country went into darkness. And it was not the only time. I have friends in Puerto Rico, like who live in the island, Puerto Rico. They say that they remain without power for days on end. It is not news. Ecuador, the government of Ecuador has a policy of blackouts every day, like 6 hours, 8 hours, things like that. Is it news? It is not. Is anybody calling for an invasion of Ecuador, overthrowing of the government of Noboa that does not anything except terrorism, state terrorism? No, there is none. There are blackouts in Peru also, very similar. There was a blackout even in whole city of Buenos Aires went into darkness for 2 days.
A journalist we all admire, Radia Kalik. I think every other time I see an interview with her, or I see her conducting an interview, there's a blackout that's happening in Lebanon. So even in a country like Lebanon, which should not have any blackout experiences, that a lot of that has to do with because of Western sanctions, and a lot of it has to do with capitalism and so forth.
Well, actually, yeah. In case of Lebanon, actually, if Lebanon has any electricity or oil or anything, it is because Hezbollah is there. It is part of government. If it was not, then there would be no. Then Lebanon would be in darkness every day. So when they say that there are blackouts in Caracas or blackouts anywhere in Venezuela or in Cuba or in elsewhere, it's not. Well, this is news. And blackouts in so-called socialist countries are news, but blackouts
Even
in
in the US,
Yeah.
there are a lot of blackouts. No one, and they has been somehow normalized. But there is a lot of blackouts in the US that are underreported. But I mean, of course, they might not be massive, not all nationwide blackouts, but there are regions in the US that they suffer.
But also that whole issue of the incentives. So there are Cubans who will go to the US illegally, and they'll purposely, engage in full-on fake news, or they might weaponize some half-truths that they're fleeing political persecution. You have that with Venezuela, and in fact, one of my favorite stories about propaganda is North Korea, where apparently a majority of North Korean defectors, all the stories they say about, oh, this evil communist dictatorship that shaves our head and puts us in the firing squad if we don't win basketball games and soccer games and whatnot. All of those stories, total BS and so forth, to the point that the CIA says that they can't use North Korean defectors anymore against North Korea because all of their stories tend out to be total BS. So the only thing that the sanctions have done in North Korea is, the sanctions have crippled North Korea to the point that, yes, North Koreans then do go out of their way to illegally go into South Korea, Japan, and China, and so forth. But then, at the end of the day, a majority of them are fleeing because of economic reasons. But they know that if they make up stories about the North Korean leadership and why they leave, they pray that they get a good supposedly a good apartment in Seoul or Tokyo or Beijing and whatnot. So I think that's quite interesting. So that's interesting.
Or in the US, that lady who went into that podcast, Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah, the Joe Rogan experience. Yeah, that's
yeah. So she also made up the same stories of pushing trains because there is no oil or electricity. And as far as I know, North Korean trains are electrified. Yeah, eating rats and all sort of things. Of course, the Venezuelan stories are not as egregious or as outrageous, but they're still there, And there are people who believe those stories. I mean, not Venezuelans, but and recently there was some things about school shootings, and school shootings are normalized in the US, right? There are every day. I mean, there are more than one school shootings every year, even more than 2,000 school shootings. So I mean, there must be 3-4 every day at least.
But it still is the safest country in the world. It still is the best country in the world.
Somebody pointed out that school shootings do not happen in Venezuela. Okay, so which is then, in which country are children more safer? And there were people who were saying, no, there are no school shootings in Venezuela because children go hungry because, there is no food in Venezuela. Children are going hungry. And that is why, I mean, if you are hungry, that you are not thinking of killing other people. And this is a sort of contradiction, because they said that because people are poor, they commit crimes. But at the same time, because children are hungry, they do not kill their peers. So this is a sort of contradiction. And also to clear things up, no, Venezuelan children in school actually are not going hungry. They get school meals, unlike in the US. So
free school meals, yes.
Yeah, so these things happen. So these sort of things happen. And this is exactly what we face when we are trying to talk to people. So when we are trying to talk to people with the data or with the experience or something, you will always come up against this sort of limited vision, or the narratives that are created, and not just created, repeated a million times, blown up with half-truths here and there, but mostly made up things like Cartel de los Soles and Maduro beating someone up or something like that. Yes, that I have also heard that. So these sort of things, you will see this, you will hear this gets repeated in Al Jazeera, in CNN, in all sorts of media, and even in the Guardian, etc. And there are people who will say, no, we trust the Guardian. We are from the left. We trust the Guardian. We trust Amnesty International. We trust our friends, and we know that what you are saying is wrong, because they have been in this business for a long time and they know where to look. And then they will also say that they are not allowed to work, or that. And then you have all these so-called, multilateral organizations like the UN, like the International Criminal Court, like the UN Refugee Agency, all these organizations that lend themselves to this narrative of regime change in Venezuela. So you have UN Refugee Agency considering Venezuelan migrants as refugees, political refugees, when they are mostly economic refugees. And they are also they would inflate the number of Venezuelan migrants to create, to just add to the narrative. They will invite people like Leopoldo Lopez or, Juan Guaido's wife on their panels to speak to the UN Human Rights Council, but they will, and the Venezuelan government officials remain sanctioned, so they cannot travel to most places, or they do not actually get the places. Like when people say that targeted sanctions are not that important, they are wrong. I should also point this out, that targeted sanctions against government officials are also very serious, because in many cases they cannot represent their country at legal instances in international courts, and they have to do it with other legal organizations, with other organizations from other countries. So there are instances like a case against some Venezuelan asset in the US, and Venezuelan government officials cannot represent Venezuela because they are sanctioned. They cannot go there. So these are very serious things that are also not talked about, that are minimized, or that are totally disappeared from the narrative, even in alternative media, and we have a tremendous lack of solidarity in those cases also.
Fascinating. Well, I could go on talking to you guys for hours, but as you mentioned, we do have a problem with people's attention span, and we've gone on for a little too long. It's another one of our Youri Rogan experiences, except without the 2,000 million views. But guys, fascinating subject, and it's definitely a subject that we definitely have to return to, because Jesus' response to the issue of crime in Venezuela, I think, is fascinating. I think we actually should dedicate another program, just entirely to that, because I thought it was quite fascinating, and it was very interesting to learn from him. But until then, we're going to wrap it up for now. So we were joined on this issue of 1+1, our All Things Venezuela edition, our All Things Latin America edition, with the editors of Orinoco Tribune. Let me remind folks that Orinoco Tribe. Let me remind folks. Saheli Chowdhury, she's part of the editorial team of Orinoco Tribune, has even contributed articles herself to the platform. And Jesus Rodriguez, the editor-in-chief and founder of Orinoco Tribune. And let me remind folks, it's a Venezuela-based independent news outlet providing both a Chavista perspective to Latin American affairs and hugely critical anti-imperialist left-wing perspective on international affairs. Saheli, Jesus, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today, and I will definitely try to invite you both soon to revisit these topics. And until then, here's hoping that the People Power movement continue to advance in their Venezuela solidarity, and here's hoping that Venezuela continues to be resilient and overcome all of these machinations that the evil Western imperialist governments are trying to do in overthrowing them. But until then, thank you very much, and good night to you both. And yes, and folks, yes, subscribe to Orinoco Tribune and donate generously to them, and don't forget to also subscribe to 1+1 and donate generously to us at our PayPal. Ciao until then.
Un abrazo, compa.